we traditionally have received that and said, well, yeah, of course we want to fight. I don't want to let this beat me. I think there's a lot of meat on that bone in terms of, is that a conversation we should be having, as a society, and ways in which, again, being better informed. To me, the medical establishment is just like the publishing industry. They've traditionally been the gatekeepers of knowledge. And now with the internet and public forums, there's other options that are out there, and maybe people can be better informed about any illness, not just cancer, but you take some of the power away from the doctors, and I think, interestingly, some of the doctors might welcome that. It's crazy, from my limited understanding of it. I don't think the doctors are even resisting that. Maybe the drug makers and manufacturers are resisting that, but doctors want their patients to be better informed. So I've found that the more people I've talked to, again, there's a lot of ignorance, and in the literal sense of the word, and I count myself, I went through this and became an expert of sorts, and it was humbling how little I knew about the whole process. Allison.
So, as someone who's read the book, I can say, even not having sick parents, but having aging parents, there was so much I could relate to about how members of that generation are reluctant to share and talk, and your frustration with that. Mm-hmm. And so I would just say, even for people who aren't going through the horror that you went through, there's still a lot of very relatable generational issues that you talk about in really, I think, moving and powerful ways, the way you struggle to understand your father. Mm-hmm. But also, I have to think that anybody, I'm speaking to assuage your discomfort about talking about yourself, because I think anybody that's gone through something that's so personal will see themselves in your book, whether it's your rage or your not wanting to deal with it, or your, all the things that you go through with your sister, and it's so universal what you're talking about that I can't, while I admire your aligning with cancer charities, you could speak to firefighters who would probably find something that would be really relatable.
Well, I appreciate that for sure, and I would say, that was kind of, on one hand, people have asked me, God, how tough was that to write? And the reality is, it was long enough after, and I processed the grief, and every day is tough. Losing a loved one is tough. You don't recover from that. But writing it was actually not as challenging as I would have thought, partly because I'd already experienced it. So it really was more relating what had happened and grappling with how universal it is and respecting that. So in that regard, again, it made it very easy to universalize it, because who hasn't been through this, or who wouldn't want to have their loved ones in as comfortable and happy a situation? That's what we all want for ourselves and our family and our loved ones. So yeah, I definitely did want to keep circling back throughout this narrative how this impacts everyone, and awareness, and it isn't just the sickness part. And you bring up, so one of the tensions that I explore in the book is my mom's 100% Italian, very emotional, very open, very loud, and my dad is the stereotypical cliched Irishman from Boston, quiet, stoic, doesn't want to talk about anything, and very opposite. And I've got a bit of both of that in me. And so yeah, on a human level, I had to navigate how to run interference between a mother who had certain needs, my own needs, my dad's needs, and recognizing there's things he's doing right now that I would never do, but I appreciate that he's the one living with her day in and day out. There's all kinds of familial drama, and what I found is, something like this usually, from what I've observed in the world, it typically will pull a family closer together, or it'll split them apart, and I've heard stories of both. And in my instance, I'm happy to say that, largely it drew us closer together, and I think because it can't not. If you have a common goal of wanting to take care of someone, it can't help but pull you guys together in ways that make the past issues seem really trivial. So I find that I don't really quarrel with my sister like I used to, because it's like, we're actually going to fight about this. We've been through something much bigger than that. So yeah, there is definitely a personal application there that I think anyone But I didn't want to use this as a vehicle to like promote, so you guys should buy my book. But yeah, I mean, I just, again.
You should buy it. It's really good.
Again, I think people would agree. I mean, to want to talk about, I don't know, the aspect of promotion, especially with colleagues, is kind of, a little unnerving. But I'm definitely happy to answer any other questions about the book or,
First of all, Sean, we work here. We're okay with promotion. We're good.
I had a question about for someone who's not a known author or starting out, and you're saying that everything is kind of so easy now to put out your work. How do you prevent people from stealing your work? Or say if you write poetry and you have a blog and you want people to read it and you want people to spread the word about you, but how do you get someone to not take your work and try to make it their own?
I mean, that's in a weird way, I think that was more of an issue 20 years ago. Because if you wrote it on a typewriter and had the only copy of it, and if you left it on the subway, someone could repurpose that and say, prove it. Whereas now, you can send emails to yourself, you can copyright it. I don't do that personally, but it's totally legit to every piece you write. Copyright Sean Murphy, May 14th, 2014. But there's usually a paper trail, or ironically, a digital trail. I've heard that question come up a lot in my life, and I think it's a very flippant response. But I've heard a lot of authors and publishers say, "Don't worry about it. No one wants your stuff." And I found that to be the case. I mean, as far as I'm aware, I've never had anyone try to push off my work as their own. But I think most people that are doing that, the whole idea of writing a poem, ultimately, I think, is a form of expression. But the real answer, the cynical, true answer is there's no money in it. I mean, what is someone that could be accused of plagiarism? What do they stand to gain unless they know in advance? If I steal this and push it off on my own, I can make a lot of money. Again, in this day and age, it would be pretty easy to prove that it wasn't theirs. So I guess in an encouraging way, I would say anyone out there that has those concerns, which are totally legit, that's probably the last obstacle you'd encounter in terms of getting your work to a wider audience, just because everyone else is so self-absorbed with their own work. But it is a concern. I mean, I'm sure it happens all the time. I honestly haven't heard of a lot of cases where it's really been an issue.
And you're also saying that Amazon can actually print your book, like it's a kind of one-stop shop.
Yep. So again, I mean, and I'm kind of, I don't know the real answer, but I mean, I'm imagining 5-7 years ago, Amazon didn't have the plant and the facility to do this all themselves. But again, I think they made an investment on the infrastructure and realized they saw the research, like we do in the dorks in our department. Like they saw the trend and said, this is going to be huge. So yeah, it's huge now, but we're making a bet that in 5 or 10 years, e-readers are going to be, everyone's going to own an e-reader. And then to me, tablets was what really put it over the top. Because e-readers were doing okay, but they were kind of a niche. It's a neat thing to have. Tablets, all of a sudden you had an e-reader. Basically, you had an e-reader that you could carry around with you. I think Amazon really was smart to realize we want in, and they basically did what Apple did. Like we want to own, all aspects of this. People have to come through us to get the material. And now that it's played out that way, it's a win-win. And the fact that they do print on demand is genius, because that really does, it benefits everyone but the old gatekeepers. And there's always a complication to every scenario. It's not like it's all rosy, but really the only people that are protesting, because you see Barnes and Noble go away like that. As a reader, I don't like that, but that's just reality. That's like saying I don't like seeing vinyl go away, even though vinyl's coming back. But you don't. But that's kind of the attrition. That's like someone saying I miss the horse and buggies. And believe me, I love bookstores. I don't say that lightly, but that's the wrong argument. The right argument is follow the money. Who's making the money now? And I know for writers, interestingly, I think writers have catapulted musicians, where 5-10 years ago, I envied musicians in terms of the advocacy and agency that they might have had. Now they're having issues because it's a lot easier to pirate a song and put that on YouTube. It is difficult to pirate a book. So the mechanisms in place now is the author owns a certain percentage of their work. I own this, no publisher owns it. I made up the publishing name, Bright Moments Books, and Amazon gets their cut. So it's a win-win for them. If they sell one book, they get that cut. If they sell 10,000 or 1 million of these, they get a cut of every piece of that. But the only people that stand to not benefit from that are the old booksellers that said, yeah, but we have to make this. You can't do that. Now that someone can do it, it's a cheaper, I purposely priced it cheap, but my Kindle's available for $2.99. And the paperback book, I think, is $12.99. So again, for a potential reader, that's cheaper. And for me, I'm getting a bigger cut. Now, my running joke is who wants to be a 100-aire, because you need to be selling a lot of units to make money, but that's not the point. Most people don't write, to quit their day job. Why would I want to quit my day job? Angela.
My sister self-published on Amazon too, a family memoir, and she got a lot of backlash when she ran around to do her book talks at independent bookstores and libraries
because Amazon's the devil. Yeah.
Amazon's the devil. Have you gotten much of that, or?
I haven't. In fairness, your sister's probably been more successful than me. I haven't done a lot of book and that I'm happy to talk about that too. I mean, so I've done, because I don't know a lot, but I do know a few things, and I thought, how can I work within the system and shake it up a little bit? So I've given readings at vineyards, and I've given readings, at bars, and that's not unique or original, but I think the old paradigm was, yeah, you have to book your reading at a Barnes & Noble or whomever, and you go there and you sit down and people come in and you sign your book, and it's like, let's make it more of a guerrilla operation. Let's make it rock and roll and just do whatever we want. So later in a couple of weeks, I'm going up to Brooklyn and I'm doing very tongue-in-cheek, but I'm doing an old school, like beatnik. I've got a couple of jazz musicians that I'm going to perform with, and I'm going to do a reading and they're going to play live music, and we're going to take donations for charity. So again, it's like the establishment that booked it was game because they saw, again, enough of a pedigree, like, let's check this idiot out. All right, he sold some copies. Oh, I've heard these musicians, they're New York musicians. All right, we'll probably get a little bit of a crowd there. So they're going to sell drinks. We're going to promote our work, and all the money that we collect, there's no cover charge. It's going to have to pass the hat. Whatever we make goes to charity. So again, there's a grotesque self-promotion there, but on the surface, it's, if you like what you heard, you can go on Amazon and buy my book, or maybe I'll have copies there. But at the end of the day, we might make $100 or a few $100s for charity, and everyone's happy. But that to me is a way of avoiding the old paradigm, because there aren't a lot of bookstores around anymore. Or the independent bookstores, what are they going to do to promote you? You're going to end up doing all the promotion yourself. Social media helps with that enormously, but even like when I did my thing at the Vineyard, they were very happy to have it. They were very nice to have it. They weren't going to lift a finger to, like, whatever traffic comes in is great, but we don't have the bandwidth to help you promote this. That's just not going to happen. So
we can have a little sample of what you're going to do, what you're going to read next week when you do Boston.
I can read a little section of the book if that's of any interest. Okay. I have one section that is, it kind of talks about a lot of the things I've talked about today. It's called Q&A. And, it kind of summarizes why I wrote the book in terms of like Q&A, like what were the questions I had and still have. Question, what would you do differently? Answer, nothing. True answer, everything. Truest answer, I don't know. If the death of a loved one provides the ultimate answer, it also prompts all sorts of questions. The universal ones, for starters. When will I die? How will I die? Why do we die? The personal ones. What will I remember? What might I regret? And ultimately the question that could determine the rest of your life. What would I do differently? What would you do differently? I've never asked my sister this question. She did everything she could, and in many ways she did more than any of us. She worked the internet like it was a convention and introduced herself to every article she could find. She obsessively sought out all the inside information she could uncover, even if so many shortcuts to insight led to locked doors and dead ends. Our own mother had been left with the unyielding aftershock of sorrow. When her mother died of cancer, everything happened too quickly, without time to facilitate any sort of strategy. She and her 6 siblings hardly had time to react, much less regret what could have transpired. They never knew what hit them. The cancer that took their mother was like an anonymous assassin. Before anyone could look for faces or fingerprints, the crime scene was already in the past tense. What could we have done differently? We knew what we were up against, yet still had no idea how little we knew. If this was 10 years ago, I'd send you on your way, the surgeon said after her first operation in '97. But knowing what we know now, I'm recommending a round of chemotherapy. Let's blast your system so the cancer doesn't even have a chance to come back. We wouldn't worry about what we could have done, we thought. We did it. The cancer came back, of course. A second successful surgery in 2000 didn't give us false hope and couldn't lull us into a false sense of security. This time the surgeon recommended radiation followed by chemotherapy, but we knew we were doing all we could do. Do you think it's going to come back? That's the question my sister asked me in July of 2001, just before my mother returned for her annual checkup. No, I told her truthfully. She looks good, she feels healthy, we did everything we could do. This is what I said to my sister and to myself. They caught it before it spread, again. Her system got the chemical scrub, again. What possible chance was there it could find another foothold? The cancer came back, of course. A third, not entirely successful surgery in 2001 left us no chance to kid ourselves. The prognosis was ugly, but not impossible. She was still ready to fight, and we'd back her down that road as far as we could go. Do you think it'll ever go away? That's the question none of us ever asked. We knew it was in there, and we knew it wasn't going anywhere, but it could be stalled, it could shrink, it could hopefully be managed. There were clinical trials to consider, reasons to think positive thoughts, and always the chance that a miracle might occur. Here's the thing. What you don't know will hurt you, whether it involves cancer or used cars. Here's another thing. My sister learned more about cancer, symptoms, treatments, and clinical trials in a little over a year than most people could or would ever want to learn in a lifetime. One of my good friends is an oncologist. Another has been a hospice nurse. We also lived in an era where the click of a mouse could uncover more detail than 1,000 old medical journals. And still, looking back, it's disconcerting how little we knew, how little we still know, how much more we could learn, and how awful it would be if we were ever obliged to do so. So we can't change what we couldn't do or know or ask or say, and we collectively recognize and accept that all the information in the world may have done next to nothing to change what happened to her. We knew enough and were fortunate enough to sign up for some experimental treatments after that third surgery in 2001. The fact that they ultimately proved unsuccessful, too little, too late, doesn't mean we shouldn't have explored those options. Perhaps we could have explored other ones as well. What could you have done differently? This is the question we were never able to ask the assorted surgeons, doctors, and administrators. And what would they say if we had? What could they say? How much more time does she have? That's the question we did ask, as directly as possible, always leaving enough room for the doctors, for ourselves, to avoid predictions that might be too true or come too soon. And the surgeons told us, depending on the way you hear the words, especially in hindsight, as little as they could get away with, or as much as they dared, while steering us as far as possible from an answer we'd figure out on our own eventually. So, any other questions or thoughts? I'd be happy to answer. Or
What's next?
what's next? So that's a great question. So any project you work on inevitably leaves a lot of stuff on the side. And what I have found with a lot of things I've written is some of the best writing, or some of the stuff you think is the best writing, ultimately doesn't fit the current project. So I had to kind of reluctantly, and working with an editor was very helpful with this, really take the steak knife out and pare away some things that I was really proud of, but I recognized with time and hindsight, like, that isn't quite right. And what I found was a lot of the material was much more personal. There's a lot of me in here, but it's focused on my mom and other things. A lot of the material that was hitting the cutting room floor was my own thoughts on a lot of these issues. And by the time I was done, I realized I've got about 70 pages of material that all fits together pretty nicely. So I don't know if it's going to be what I finish next, but another memoir I think is in the works. And it's a great question because it ties us kind of full circle. So I've written 2 novels when I was younger, one in my 20s, one in my 30s, labors of love, very self-absorbed attempts at, tackling the world. But they've been sitting, in a drawer. I mean, I've had people look at them, and there's a lot of stories with those, but false starts, not meant to be, all that. But I've got 2 projects that I own, and this experience has made me realize why on earth wouldn't I take one of those novels and get that baby out there and let the world determine, and that would be a neat story if one of the things I've written that for a variety of reasons, the biggest one being probably wasn't good enough, but for whatever reason hasn't seen the light of day, if one of those ends up making some noise, that would be very validating. And again, I've never been bitter, and I wouldn't be bitter in retrospect, but it would be neat to think a novel I wrote that couldn't get published in the old world might do okay, and it would be a way of saying this new reality is good, because it does give a book that may never, for a million reasons, good and bad, may never have had a chance to get read, might find its audience and get read. So I'm very optimistic about the stuff I've already done and the stuff I do in the future. There's no limitations now. I think that's, to bring it back to CEA, but truthfully, it's the essence of innovation, and any situation that democratizes the way content is created and received has to be a good thing, something we should all embrace and endorse. And yeah, pitch, couldn't get away with it without saying this, but in all seriousness, if I didn't work here, I don't think I would have been as well informed, because I wouldn't be doing the things I did. So it's very humbling to think that a place you work at gives you some tools to use in your personal life in ways that are really meaningful and satisfying. So thank you guys for coming. I hope that was helpful.